Hi, I'm Tom Sparks. Back in November, I had a chance to talk to Dan Healy. As the Grateful Dead sound man, Dan Healy has been checking levels and mixing microphones for over 20 years. Here's part one of our conversation as Dan talked about the unusual situation in which he first met the band.
So just one night, Cipollina conned me into going to a show with them, and the Grateful Dead was the opening band. And like Quicksilver, nobody had any money, and in those days, if your amplifier broke, it could frequently shut the show down. So we walked in about the middle of the Grateful Dead set, and music had stopped, and it was, I think, Jerry or Phil's amp. One of those guys' amps broke. And it was kind of the, is there a doctor in the house routine, you know. So Cipollina pushed me up onto the stage. Said, here, this guy, you know, and he ratted on me. You know, this guy knows about amps and stuff. Okay. So I went up and I twitched with whatever it was. And anyway, I got the amp working. And so I hung out on the back of the stage, and the Grateful Dead played the rest of their set. And at the end, Jerry came up to me and introduced himself, said, hey, man, thanks a lot for coming up and helping. And they invited me up to the dressing room, so I wound up going up and shooting the baloney with those guys, and I missed all the Quicksilver set. I didn't even see that. But during my conversation with Jerry and Phil, I think it was, I made some comment, because I'd been used to working in a recording studio and big monitor speakers, and it sounded good and everything. I made some crack about the sound system, which was two little speakers on each side, one on each side of the stage, and you couldn't even tell, like Pigpen would be singing. You couldn't even tell if he was singing.
Kind of like this here.
Kind of like this here, yeah. And bless everyone's pointed little heads in the sound department.
Right.
And so I made some wisecrack about it, and Jerry basically challenged me to put my sound system where my mouth was, you know. So I was kind of looking for something that I knew something was going to develop. I had a feeling that in my future there was something that was coming about, and there's stirring in the back of my mind, you know. So I said, okay. So 2 weeks from that date, we were to play there again. And so what I did is I went to all the different sound companies, and I rented a bunch of equipment. I won't tell how I got the money to rent the equipment, but anyway, we collected up enough money, and I rented a bunch of equipment, and I made this huge pile of speakers on each side of the stage. And I had to go there a couple of days ahead of time and interface it all, because there were different sound companies, and none of that stuff was interchangeable, you know. So I had to change all the connectors and everything so that it would all lash up together. And so the show started, and it was funky, but it was a tremendous improvement from what everybody knew. And it was kind of at that moment, it was the birth of the concept of electronics and sound reinforcement playing a much larger role in music than it had ever in years prior to that.
In early 1973, the Dead introduced a revolutionary sound system, now known as the famous Wall of Sound. Dan explained the genesis of this project.
And one of the main reasons for developing the Wall of Sound was we wanted to, eliminate as much as possible all forms of harmonic distortion. It mainly a distortion-free system, because the conventional equipment at that point worked and you could get it loud enough, but it wasn't very good sounding, and there was tremendous amounts of distortion and stuff. So we we set out to develop a system that was basically free of distortion, was really pure. And in doing so, it led us on a tremendous amount of research, and we developed a whole lot of ideas. We finally manifested a model after spending a few years. We started about 1969 researching it, and by 1973 we were ready to actually make a working model of it. So we built it, and the idea for that sound system wasn't so much that it was the final or permanent end result, but that it would provide us an area to do more research. And so we constructed it and fabricated it in such a way that we could set it up differently anytime we wanted, in any different kind of configuration, objectively, to be able to find that elusive best way to set it up. You know.
So you could experiment as you went and use the show as kind of an experimental ground?
Yes, the system was continuously changing. It didn't, I don't think we ever did the same thing twice, you know.
Next month, we'll hear what happened when all the tweeters blew out during the first few minutes of an early Wall of Sound concert.